Dominic Culverwell, good to see you, man. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, very excited. Been a long time coming, and yeah, been a big fan of the podcast over the last few months. Kept me going through quarantine.
Thank you, man. That's why I'm here, man. That's why I'm here. I think the biggest thing I need to announce at the start of this one, man, is that I am ready, man. I'm ready for the battle against George Soros and the paedophile liberal elite. I'm here on the front line.
Right. Fair enough. Let's see. I'm a Soros defender, and I hope by the end of it, we start to like every time they see an attack on him, they start to question where is that attack really coming from. Because it's easy. Like it's easy to look at Soros and you see him as this billionaire capitalist, and you're like, he must be an evil guy. You know, he must be this deceptive human being. But no, he's being used as a tool by the far right, really, because he's like the only one of the few billionaires that actually does support a lot of liberal, progressive causes, and he gives away much more than he actually makes as well in these days. And yeah, I think it's impressive. But it's interesting to see him get like brought up around the George Floyd protests, right? Like he's being accused of funding them, of starting the protests. I don't know if it's like, obviously I'm into this disinformation world, so I see it, but I don't know how much it affects like the general public. Like, I don't know if you've noticed it when you're on Twitter or Instagram or whatever.
Yeah, well, I do my best to steer clear of the demonic Twitterverse, man. I mean, like I try not to pay too much attention because I think it is, sometimes there's just like an information overload that, you know, our generation has, you know, been burdened with. And, you know, I often, if I do have a session when I'm on, I go diving down the rabbit holes and all that stuff. I tend to come out quite frustrated. So I do tend to avoid it. But yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about Soros and stuff. It is, I think there's a massive scapegoating culture that is kind of being bred through this distrust in the media and all of that. But before we jump into all of that, I should just be polite and ask you how you actually are, man. How have you been going through this pandemic and stuff? And like,
yeah, it's fine because so I'm in Berlin, and Berlin was one of the most relaxed European cities to be in a pandemic. Like there was never this like complete lockdown that you had in France and Spain. Like you were sort of restricted in the number of people you could meet up with. I think it was only really like one other person, but you could still go out and about, and like we were seeing people all day whenever I just went out for a walk. We always tried to get out of the apartment at least once a day, just so I didn't feel claustrophobic and going insane. But as soon as I stepped outside, I mean, it wasn't as normal because all the shops were closed. But you still see people just relaxing, and obviously it was amazing weather, so people were just chilling in the sun. So it was not so depressing like it was in you know, from friends in Paris, or even I think even in England, man. I mean, you guys, you were allowed an hour of exercise a day?
Not that half the people actually paid attention to it and followed the rules. But yeah, it was like I think one bit of exercise a day, and then it became two. But yeah, it's strange. It's interesting how in Germany, you know, Germany wasn't affected in the same way. That's interesting. But like also interesting to see like how have you found it, man, settling into, you know, a different country and adapting to kind of German culture, if you have.
Yeah, I mean, Berlin isn't really Germany in the same way that, you know, people say London isn't really England. You know, it's its sort of its own thing. Same in Berlin, man, because it was a city that was effectively like an isolated island throughout the Cold War. So it has its completely different culture to the rest of Germany. So obviously you had back in the day, you had the Berlin Wall running through, and it was going around West Berlin. So West Berlin was sort of owned or occupied by the Allied forces after the Second World War. So you had Britain, France, and America. Then the east side of the city was obviously communist and under influence of the Soviet Union, or it was its own country called the GDR, the German Democratic Republic. It's always amusing because, you know, it's always like the most undemocratic countries have democracy in their name, like North Korea as well.
Yes.
So anyway, so
But you like
because
it.
Berlin, sorry?
But you like it in Germany, yeah?
Yeah, it's, like the history here is crazy. And it really began, I think, in the 60s, this like crazy Berlin counterculture that kind of became so influential around Europe. Because actually West Berlin, a lot of people don't realize, it's not actually attached to West Germany. Berlin itself is really far east. It's only about like 90 kilometers away from Poland. You could drive there in like under an hour and a half. So West Berlin was surrounded by East Germany, basically a completely different country. So there, it was completely like isolated, this little island. So if you wanted to get from West Berlin to West Germany, you'd have to like drive through and not being allowed to stop in East Germany, or you had to get on a train or a plane, etc. And so the rest of Germany, rest of West Germany had like what's the word when you have to join the army? Conscription, right? When you have to join the army, conscription. So West Germany had that, but West Berlin didn't. So what you had in the 60s was like, you know, all the hippie movement going on, people who were really like anti-war and activists who didn't want to sign up for the army. They just left West Germany and moved to West Berlin. And at that time, you know, it was like a really depressing city, war-torn, like half the buildings were, you know, they didn't even have plumbing or anything. So people would just move into these squats. And you had lots of students, activists, artists, all those kind of people, ravers eventually. And they started to like create this really different culture from the rest of Germany. You know, Germany is quite a rigid country, but Berlin is just like totally free. You can literally be whoever you want here. Like you can dress however you want, you can kind of think whatever you want. And it's just just a mad accepting city, to be honest. It's really cool.
You been to any good raves yet, or?
Yeah, we've been to a few. It's my birthday in a next weekend actually, so we're gonna have a party up this old World War II fort, like an old fortress. Nice. And you can just like climb up. So I was just gonna grab a few friends, grab some speakers, and have a little rave up there. My birthday.
Nice. Sounds good. How's Ketch finding it?
Yeah, I think Ketch is up in the background looking at me, but would it be fair to say that you found it a little bit? I can bring her into the conversation if you want.
Why not?
Do you want to, I mean, she's got to get ready for work, but she's just doing her hair at the moment. But she's found it different to I have, I think. So.
Hi, I'm just doing my hair.
How you doing?
But yeah, now it's as in what, Berlin in general, or?
Yeah, because I mean, look, I think we've noticed firstly that there's not that many like mixed race couples here.
No, I feel like we've started to notice a lot more recently.
Yeah, perhaps a few more, because I guess we've started to make more friends. But like you notice that it was harder to get a job here than you expected it to be. And then we had a friend, Megan, who's Scottish, who pretty much went to the same university as us, has very similar job experience to Ketch. She moved like a month afterwards. Within a week, she already had like 3 job offers whilst Ketch was still searching. And they were both applying to like the same kind of places, you know, but when they see Ukechukwu and Mokolo on the application, that's going to be less likely to employ rather than saying Megan Park. So I think we've noticed that there is a more underlying racism here than in the UK.
I was wondering how, what, because your the work you're doing and stuff is really interesting in terms of like doing that research into the far right and stuff, and some of the kind of ethno-white nationalism. Do you kind of feel that, I know Berlin is obviously very different from the rest of Germany, but in sort of comparison with you know your experiences in Britain or whatever, do you notice a significant difference to the way like ethnic minorities are treated at all?
Yeah, totally. Like it's much more segregated here, even in Berlin, than it is in the UK. Like London does feel much more of a melting pot. Even Oxford isn't exactly the most multicultural place, but it's a relatively multicultural city. But you know, you do have sort of everyone there's not one area really in London where I'd be like, okay, that is predominantly black, or I mean, you have like, I guess, some predominantly Asian areas, but here it's like different neighborhoods are, the split is mainly between Middle Easterners and Europeans. So yeah, our neighborhood, for example, is like a predominantly Turkish neighborhood, and you don't see like that many like sort of white Germans, and the ones you do see are sort of like, you know, the trendy young ones like ourselves. But it is, yeah, you don't like when you see school kids hanging out together, and it's still like you don't really see many Middle Eastern school kids hanging out with like European school kids, for example. It does feel more split. You don't, when you see groups of people walking around, you know, it's many like large groups of white people or large groups of Middle Eastern people. It's rare to see like diverse groups who are not, you know, and the international community is completely different. I'm talking about the sort of the German communities here. So that's kind of strange, and that comes from Germany's immigration history, really different to our one. So it sort of stems from 1960s, 1950s again. So when Germany was having to be rebuilt after the war, they invited a lot of Southern European and Middle Eastern, North African immigrants. Actually, I shouldn't say immigrants, they were called guest workers, right? So the idea was that they weren't going to immigrate to the country. They were just going to work for a few years, get some money, help build up the country, but then eventually they were supposed to move back to their home country after a few years. Obviously what happened was that a lot of people came over. In the end, it was mainly the Turkish community that came over, often from rural areas where the literacy rate wasn't so high. So they moved over to Germany, and there was no incentive to assimilate. Like there was no influence from the German government, so they would even sort of employ Turkish-speaking people in the factories where the Turks were working, so that the Turks didn't have to learn German. But obviously what happened was that a lot of people moved their families over. They realized that, okay, Germany has better job prospects, so I will stay here. And then the German government were like, okay, well, we don't want you here anymore. Let's give you some money to move back to your home country. But people didn't want to because they had their livelihood now here. And they moved into these sort of areas which were like undesirable. In Berlin, it was the areas that were closest to the Berlin Wall, areas that were sort of traditionally working class that were being destroyed. And so there was like this sort of weird, 30 years later, or 50 years later, there's sort of this weird divide, man, because they were never fully accepted as being German. They don't have the like birthright. So even if you're born in Germany, you may not be a German citizen. Like you have to like wait a long time, and the immigration process to become a citizen is so tedious and long that a lot of people don't bother. So what you have is actually a group of like a generation of kids growing up here who don't have German citizenship, and they don't, and they're supposedly Turkish citizens, yet they've never been to Turkey. They've only spent their lives in Germany, and they don't have like a full grasp of the German language. They don't have a grasp of fully of like the Turkish language. So it's this weird situation, man. And it was also weird in the eastern side as well. I was talking about this recently. So the East also had guest workers coming in too, but from communist countries, so from Cuba, a lot coming from Angola, as well as Vietnam. And they were even more segregated. Like they were not even allowed to mix with German people. They were given their housing block. They were told you have to live in your dormitories. You cannot mix with the German people. If you get pregnant, you have to have an abortion.
Wow.
They force people to have abortions if they got pregnant from a German. And that was in the socialist side of Germany. But it's like this weird nationalism that never really kind of went away. Even in the supposedly egalitarian communist side of the country, they still obviously viewed themselves in a different light. So totally different immigration process here. And I think it was only really in 2005 that Germany actually admitted to being a country of immigrants rather than being guest workers.
Right.
So Kettle's on if you can hear the kettle in the background, if that background noise is
No, it's all right. It's all right. Don't worry.
It's all good. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. That sounds really interesting. Another question I had was, whereabouts would you say that the pockets of kind of white nationalism based then? Is there any presence in Berlin, or is it, what do you think?
There is. So the stereotype is that the East has a bigger far-right movement than the West. So there's like the eastern suburbs of Berlin, one called Marzahn. I'm sorry for all the Germans if I pronounced that incorrectly. And Köpenick as well are stereotypically Nazi areas. And those are areas where there's not that many like Turkish immigrants or Middle Eastern immigrants. The immigrants that are there are either Vietnamese or they're from post-Soviet countries, and lots of Russians. And then the same with like outside of Berlin too, in the whole country, where it was interesting after the European election last year, I sort of looked at the map as to who had voted for what party. So in Germany, the main far-right party is the AfD, which stands for the Alternative for Deutschland. And they're really heavily anti-immigrant, but specifically anti-Muslim. And you could kind of, when I clicked on who voted for the AfD the most, it just basically just showed the outline of East Germany. So it is a stereotype, but it does have a lot of truth behind it. And some of the reason for that, I think, is a lot of East Germans feel disenfranchised, and they feel like they've had the short end of the stick, because it's still much poorer in East Germany than it is in West. Obviously the Berlin Wall came down and the country unified in 1990. And for a few years, people were really, really optimistic, right? People in the East were like, yeah, now we can buy what we want. We can live the lifestyle that the West lives. The Western side are being pumped from a lot of money from America, allegedly. And people were really, really excited. And then what happened was that the West brought out a lot of the industry from the East, and a lot of people, like millions of people, became unemployed. And then this sort of disillusionment grew, and people were just feeling frustrated, and they still didn't have the quality of life that the West did. Years later, the infrastructure in the East is nowhere near as good as the West. So people are just frustrated and they're sad, and it's difficult to be in the same country and seeing such a big divide. I mean, it is, people compare it to the North and South in England, but it goes deeper than that, because these people were separated for so many years. And so they had a different mentality completely. So I think partly that, and what was surprising was that a lot of the younger generation, even like younger than us, teenagers, like 18 and above, 19, 20, a lot of them were still supportive of the AfD too, because it's sort of installing a sense of national pride again, a sort of sense of kind of maybe purpose. And I think the AfD were actually some of the only parties that really listened to the people in the East.
Right.
So that's why they're getting support there, really.
What's also, I think we should definitely talk about the article that we just published on Ghostwriter, and I think it's because it's really interesting. I found one of the most interesting aspects of it was this historical connection between Hitler and Nazi Germany, and what we're seeing today in the far right in terms of the white genocide theory. It'd be really interesting to know a little bit about what kind of inspired you to start exploring these things, and a little bit about that connection, that historical connection.
Yeah, why did I get inspired by it? I think I'd always been interested in the concept of race as a teenager. Like, why are some people classified as white? Why are some people classified as this and that? And like, who is white as well? That was always a question, because that sort of seems to change throughout the generations. Sometimes Italians are not considered white. Sometimes Ukrainians or Spaniards are not considered white, and it sort of seemed to change over time. So I was just sort of interested in where that was. I was always Googling it as a teenager. Then I sort of ended up on these like far right neo-Nazi websites. And I was like, oh my God, what the fuck is this? And I was like, read through, and I sort of came across these like really bizarre thoughts that never really like occurred to me. And people were saying, you know, like obsessing about their white heritage. You know, they were like, you know, I'm like 100% Swedish, or, you know, I'm 100% like Irish or whatever. And then from that, I just kind of occasionally would go on just to see what the conversation was. And then I started to notice this like white genocide theory popping up again. I never really like looked that deeply into it until I guess sort of a year ago or so, when it started to become really, really prominent. And we had obviously the terrible Christchurch attack, where 51 Muslims were killed in New Zealand from a white supremacist. And he started to quote this white genocide theory. And it was in 2010 that this book was published by a Frenchman. And he basically took this theory that was sort of installed by Hitler of white genocide. So I guess I should probably explain what that is, really, because people might not know. I mean, it's basically self-explanatory. There's a theory that white people are dying out and being killed off or slowly phased out through immigration from non-white countries. And it sort of goes back to the early 20th century. There was an American guy called Madison Grant who was writing about how he noticed that there was a lot of non-Aryan immigration to America, you know, people from like North Africa or Southern Europe. And he was getting very concerned about this, or the pure Germanic Anglo-Saxon race. And he wrote this book about how the white Aryan race needs to preserve its identity. Otherwise, you know, these like dirty non-Aryans are gonna dilute the pure bloodline. And so this book was vaguely popular. I don't think it was massively popular. I haven't been able to find a copy to read, because I'm really interested in reading through what he was writing. But anyway, Hitler found it and loved it. Hitler said, "This is my Bible. Oh my God, fantastic!" Because he obviously saw Jews as some of the greatest enemies to the pure German bloodline. So he basically took this book and he condensed it into a pamphlet, which was published really early on after Nazis came to power in about I think it was 1934, the pamphlet was published, which detailed the extinction of the Aryan race. And so that was part of this big propaganda campaign. And this really like instilled a fear into people that, oh my God, you know, like my race, my people are gonna die out in generations unless I do something now. And of course we saw what that led to. But that was a really good way to get the fear mongering going, because I think it's obvious under threat, under fear, people really react in extreme ways. And I guess we're seeing that being replicated nowadays. So the Frenchman in 2010, when he took this theory of white genocide and renamed it the Great Replacement, the focus now wasn't on Jews or like Southern Europeans, but it was more on Islam and immigrants coming from Africa, coming from Asia. And he said that he was traveling around France and he went to this picturesque French village, and then he saw people in burqas walking around, and for him that really freaked him out. And he felt that France was getting invaded. And he uses these terms like colonized and invaders to describe non-white Europeans coming over to Europe. So he's sort of flipping the language around. So he's sort of portraying the European people as being oppressed by Muslims, by non-whites. And that's sort of interesting to see as well, this flipping around of language. And yeah, I think that just instills fear into people. And I think also Europeans are scared of that because they know what their ancestors did to the countries that they colonized. You know, colonization, it brings up these very like visceral images of you know, in Britain's case, you know, concentration camps and genocide. And it's very twisted to use that language to describe immigration.
Yeah.
it's really twisted, man. And that's why people are getting so scared. If you believe this stuff, you know, you're like, oh my God, they're going to genocide us. You know, it's yeah. That's why people are reacting so violently.
Yeah, I mean, it's very concerning, and unfortunately, a lot of it is sort of misinformed in a lot of ways, and it doesn't account for the fact that what are the reasons for immigration? Well, for one, it's because there are parts of this world that are suffering a lot more socio and economically, which causes people to want to come to the wealthier nations, not to colonize and erase the white people from the planet of the earth. And obviously, ironically, that kind of white genocide theory is subscribing to what we know as a pseudo-scientific notion of race. For one, you know, it's, I mean, to say the very least. But I find what I find very interesting as well, that you might be interested in, that so in some of my research around the Haitian Revolution, funny enough, one of the first texts on the Haitian Revolution was by this white supremacist guy called Lothrop Stoddard, who actually saw the Haitian Revolution as a tragedy to the white race. And it was really interesting to see that he had been one of the first to document this massive slave rebellion. And also on the white genocide thing, that's really interesting is that there's a woman, she's passed now, but her work's a bit controversial, but she's called Frances Cress Welsing, and she outlined some of the roots of racism perhaps being based in a psychology of almost what she described as like a white inferiority complex, that, you know, like the kind of Caucasian genotype is like a small percentage of the whole world population. So there's this kind of thing of you know, Europeans going around and seeing other parts of the world and seeing that, you know, most other people are melanated, whether that be in Asia and Africa and you know, America before it was colonized by Europeans in a lot of ways. So it's interesting that, you know, that kind of, you know, the psychology of it. And also, so I'll stop ranting in a second, but also it's humans, you know, but then when you actually go do the research and you see the new science coming out, Homo sapiens are actually, you know, the science is so clear that we are all one species. But also what's interesting is that Homo sapiens themselves are actually a mixture of DNA. Obviously, we're largely sapiens, but we have a lot of us in Europe do have some Neanderthal DNA. Some of us have some Denisovan DNA. And it's all just really interesting. So I found that interesting because it means Homo sapiens by nature are actually slightly mixed breed, right? So, you know, it'd be funny to say that to a white supremacist.
Yeah, I don't think they would like that too much, to be honest. But going back to the Haitian Revolution, so how did, I forgot his name, but how did he see the Haitian Revolution as being a threat to the white race? What was his theory behind that?
Well, it's really interesting because I'm sure you're familiar with The Great Gatsby, and at the beginning of The Great Gatsby, there's one of the characters talks, he's paraphrasing from a book, and he's talking about the rise of the colored empires. And that is actually based off this author, Lothrop Stoddard, who,
the book, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was maybe a Klans member or something, but essentially he kind of just gave quite a solid history of what happened during the Haitian Revolution, but he did kind of position it as symbolic of the rising threat of colored people rising up against white people, kind of thing. So that was the way he just articulated and positioned it, and said it was a tragedy that the white race had been attacked in such a way, regardless of the fact that there was slavery. But yeah, it's all fucking crazy, man.
Yeah, it is, but it's interesting how people can kind of rationalize it to themselves as well. And I've been doing a bit of research recently about, I guess, the origins of the slave trade and how people could actually allow themselves to do that without questioning how immoral it was, especially at those times when everyone was super Christian and religious and supposedly pious. And then how can you enslave a human being? And I didn't quite realize that there was this sort of propaganda campaign that was going around saying, obviously, that Africans were savages, but also that Africans didn't have a language, which I'd never heard of before. So they were like totally like demoting Africans from even being like humans at all. They were just like fully comparing them to, I guess, even less than animals in a way, because animals can communicate with each other through some kind of language. And it's just so, it's extraordinary how they can just like blatantly ignore the evidence. And I get, you know, with the thing was when explorers went to like the kingdom of Benin for the first time, and they found all these amazing riches, and then they brought them back, and people were like, no, that can't be. You know, Africans can build this lovely mask and this amazing bronze civilization.
It's
so
like
it's
an earlier, sorry, it's like an earlier form of disinformation, right?
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly the way to describe it. Being presented with evidence and then still being so obsessed with this narrative that you can't really look past it. I think humans are really good at just sticking to one narrative and not really liking what the evidence put in front of them, which I guess is why disinformation is so effective nowadays. And also even more so because I think evidence nowadays can be questioned so much more than it was 300 years ago, with the invention of Photoshop, with the invention of deep fakes especially. You know, nowadays a video being recorded, you know, even you and I might have faked this video entirely. This could just be, you know, complete CGI construct. And so humans are really now freaking out because they can't even trust evidence in front of them. So we're sort of having to deal with this non-real world now, and how can we really pick up on what is factual and what is falsely constructed. I think we're kind of freaking out quite a lot now, so we just don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know the direction to go really.
Well, let's talk about some of that. Let's talk about this era of disinformation. I know it's heavy stuff and there's no easy answers, but I think it's noble that, you know, you dedicate your time to doing sort of disinformation research. And I think, I mean, I'm interested in whether you think it's actually going to become a much more important, almost profession, you know, debunking conspiracy theories. Because, like, I mean, I'm susceptible. I mean, ironically, this is a kind of joke, you know, amongst Black people sometimes, that, you know, by your very nature as a Black person, you're going to be a bit more vulnerable to conspiracy theories, because there's historically been some massive conspiracy theories against you, right? So yeah, it's just very interesting, you know, as there has been a lot of, like, you know, I type in George Soros on Google and it's like, it's either articles saying, oh, there's still conspiracy theories about George Soros running the world, or it's people trying to actually connect some of what he's doing to Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. And what's annoying as well is, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as well on, to what extent are these conspiracies actually getting in the way of real concerns about real problems in this world?
I think it's a really good point. So I'll just start with that one, because, you know, when I was recently going to these anti-lockdown protests in Berlin just to see what was going on. And like, I went there with not really knowing what it was going to be like. And it was like stepping into like the amalgamation of every conspiracy theory you can imagine. And people were holding up signs, you know, anti-5G, anti-Bill Gates. You know, they were saying that this government was fascist for imposing a lockdown. And, you know, there's like, especially with the Bill Gates stuff, like, people have just taken it in such a weird direction. You know, they're saying that he's trying to create the virus so that he can create a vaccine and inject a microchip into people and like control the world that way. And it's so ridiculous when there's so many other criticisms we can legitimately have of Bill Gates. We can call out his tax avoidance. We can call out, you know, even the influence he has in the World Health Organization. You know, I believe it was the former head of the malaria department was a big critic of Bill Gates, because he's saying, you know, people want to keep Bill Gates happy. They want to keep that money coming in. Since the US has actually stopped funding World Health Organization, Bill Gates Foundation is the biggest donator to it. And people are, prioritizing Bill Gates's, favorites rather than equally spreading out the money. We can really argue that. And it's so frustrating when people are like, yeah, and he's going to inject a microchip and all this nonsense, because it really does avert away from legitimate criticisms. And then it also undermines legitimate criticisms as well, because people just start to associate any criticism of Bill Gates as just being a conspiracy theory, which is really, really bad as well. So that was kind of frustrating at the protests.
Do you see where it's because I'm not like trying to fuel the fire with any of them, but do you see how sometimes these conspiracy theories actually just reflect wider anxieties in society as well? Like this fear of a microchip is kind of valid in the sense that like humans are becoming closer and closer in their merging with technology, and people probably have some valid fears of wanting to slow that process down or halt it altogether. And I think sometimes it's almost like the conspiracy theories are just like a kind of symptom of the anxiety and fear, right?
Definitely.
Rather than intentional disinformation.
Yeah, I think, so there's a difference between disinformation and misinformation, by the way. So disinformation is fake news that has a deliberate purpose to, like, a malicious intent, really, whilst misinformation is if you are not aware that the information you're spreading is fake. So that's how a lot of these conspiracy theories get around. But you're right, they do reflect the anxieties and issues with our current day society. And actually a lot of the one thing that a lot of these conspiracy theories have in common is like anti-capitalism. Even the far right are anti-capitalist and the far left are anti-capitalist. This is also what was weird at the protest, was that these two people were coming together. You had really far left activists, anti-fascists, and then really far right supporters as well. And that's where they sort of kind of join up. And if we look at a lot of the figures, the targets, they are sort of like figures of neoliberalism. You have Clinton, Obama, etc. I think people also have felt so, because trying to explain it in the right way, because this is like, there's a lot of artificiality in our politics nowadays anyway. Like with Obama being given the Nobel Peace Prize so early on, and then like campaigning these vicious wars. And so people really see the hypocrisy there, and they already that automatically just makes you distrust politicians, understandably. And it makes you distrust this sort of liberal society that we have created and that we're a part of. And they think it's all kind of, very, very shallow, and you're nice on the outside, but really you're dark on the inside. So that's why people like Trump are doing so well, because, they say, or allegedly they say what they think, and they are sort of totally anti-liberal, as it were. But yeah, I think I'm not discrediting the conspiracy theories as not having any, meaning behind them. Like, I think we should look at why these conspiracy theories are forming, as good indications of where our society is failing. And then we try and save those people from going down into this massive abyss of just thinking that everyone in the world is out to get you. Because that, at the end of the day, is what it is. People are just terrified that there's some like ruling elite who want to kill off either white people or, or just take over the world and can't think of example right now, but
which is ironic, isn't it? Ironic that a ruling white elite would want to kill off white people is clearly ironic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it is. But they don't care, man. Like, that's at the end of the day, like, they just believe the narratives that they want to believe. So like, I guess like with the George Soros conspiracies, for example, because Soros was a really big supporter of the refugee immigration. He said to the EU, you need to take in 1 million refugees. He had quite a big sway in that. So people see that and they're like, oh, this like liberal Jew wants to encourage the Islamization of Europe. And from there, I guess they form this idea of like immigrants equals cheap labor, So therefore, the capitalists can make more money that way and not employ, you know, the native Europeans who would obviously ask for more money. I think that's where that theory comes from. They're like, oh, capitalism just cares about profit, doesn't care about people. So obviously immigration is good in that sense. Yeah, but I don't know how, it's so hard to know how to fight it. Because when you have
do you think fact-checking websites are one of the solutions?
I think for now they're quite a good short-term solution for people who like are not super conspiratorial just yet. Like if you see some information, it's always that you might be like, that seems a little bit you know, disingenuous. It's always good just to check on the fact-checking website. But for people who are really embedded in this narrative, in this culture, you know, fact-checking websites are obviously funded by people. You know, there's fact-checking websites funded by Soros, some that are funded by the Clinton Foundation. So they're just going to see them as tools used by the elites to carry out misinformation. And that's where it gets super hard. Like, how do we reach out to those people? And the worry is that they are turning really extreme. Like we've already seen the rise of white terrorist attacks just increase drastically in the past year. You know, the Christchurch shootings sort of sparked El Paso, and that sort of sparked the terrorist attacks in Germany earlier this year and at the end of last year. So these people are really like they're taking it, and it's not just on the internet anymore. You know, it's not just those white supremacist websites I was going on as a 15-year-old. Now it's like they're taking action. They are fully committed to fighting this imaginary fight. And a lot of them, there's a sort of theory of accelerationism. Now, I'm not super clued up to it, but I know that the basis of accelerationism, I mean, it's a really complex idea that actually stems from Warwick University, but has been adopted by the far right. And the idea is that they really want to accelerate the society we're in now, make it like uber capitalist, uber liberal, uber you know, immigrant friendly, and eventually that society will collapse in on itself. And then from the ashes, the white supremacists can build a new white utopia. So that's why, yeah, it's mad. And that's also why a lot of the terrorist attacks believe. Like the Christchurch terrorist attack wrote that in his manifesto. He was influenced by accelerationism. And we're seeing people get radicalized super quickly, man, super quickly. And it's just weird that it's taken us so long to clock onto this. And I think one of the biggest one that I've started to look at more recently, I sort of followed it for a few years. It's the QAnonymous conspiracy, which have you heard of?
Yeah.
QAnonymous? Yeah. I don't know. Again, I don't know like how known it is outside of like the world I'm in. So I'm always curious to ask people if they've heard about it or if they know anything about it. Because people have heard it in the ether, but I don't think they realize like how extreme it is. Basically, the idea is there's this whole narrative that the world is some decrepit, corrupt place run by liberal elite pedophiles who sacrifice children and eat their adrenaline glands. And that's why celebrities, especially Hollywood elites, look so young. You know, like Johnny Depp, how is he still so good looking and youthful? It's not Photoshop. It's not the amount of makeup he has in his face. It's not the fact that he's super rich and can afford, you know, surgery when he wants. No, it's he's eating baby adrenaline glands. And Donald Trump is a savior who's come to rid the world of this evil, corrupt elite. And actually somehow John F. Kennedy Jr. is also involved. Somehow I think he's going to lead the world he's going to become the president after Donald Trump. Supposedly John F. Kennedy Jr. died in a plane crash, although his body was never found, Elias. So what does that mean? It means he's been waiting, hiding out for years for a moment to rise after Donald Trump like just brings the world to it. It's just crazy, man. And we can see that it's crazy. But once you start looking at this rabbit hole and you start going down, it seems so logical. And there was I've been looking at a few Instagram accounts recently that spread the QAnonymous theory, and they use these specific hashtags. There's one which is where we go one, we go all, or it's often abbreviated to WWGI. WGA. So if you see that, stay away from that account or just watch it because it's interesting. So and it's really starting to increase more and more. And I was seeing it at these protests in Berlin. And initially, I'd only ever heard of QAnonymous being an American thing. I was like, oh, those sort of weird Trump supporters in America. But the fact that it's bled out into Europe and beyond is definitely cause for alarm. And there was actually there's a ISIS researcher who was looking into radicalization of ISIS, and now he started to look at QAnonymous because it's people literally switch from being sort of anti-establishment to being hardline QAnonymous supporters. One guy even found this Instagram account where it took this person 2 days before they were like hardline radicalized. So before they were just sort of, anti-establishment, they were like alternative health advocates, and that also seems to be a big market recently. I think from April time, something happened where a lot of supposedly left-wing progressive people who were sort of anti-capitalism suddenly jumped on board the QAnonymous train. And so, people who are anti-vaccine, promote a healthy alternative lifestyle, suddenly were hardline QAnonymous supporters. And like I said, it took this one person 2 days before they went from, supporting yoga and avoiding vaccines to let's get an army and wait for Trump to overthrow the evil.
Surely, not to trivialize it, but part of the issue here, I think, is the internet in a lot of ways. The internet is not one thing, it's good, it's bad, it's a lot of things, but clearly one of these issues is the internet and its like super speedy nature of information spreading. And it's not about like, because the reality is it's okay if you have some conspiracy theories and you do think there's a pedophile ring elite and you have some suspicions, but there was maybe a time where that stuff stayed at the pub. Do you know what I mean? Or it would be a situation where you don't speak up about that shit unless you have some solid evidence for it. The problem is the internet gives everyone a voice, so everyone's speaking up about their speculation without any evidence process. You don't need evidence. It's like it's someone said the other day, it's about being first, it's not about being right, and that seems like an issue that emphasizes it all, right?
I think so, but they still do have evidence. Like, so I think the reason why April became such a big month for QAnonymous supporters was because this documentary was released, and it's called The Fall of the Cabal, and it's all about how it just explains the QAnonymous theory from like beginning to end, but it's like supporting QAnonymous, and they like the narrator, supposedly this Dutch woman, takes you through all these photographs, and she uses that as evidence for supporting QAnonymous. So, with let me give an example. She was saying with the migrant caravan a couple of years ago going through Central America, there's a theory that Soros was supporting that as well, and she grabbed this photo of all the migrants moving through, and she pointed to their feet, and she was like, "Look, they're not wearing shoes. How could this even be possible if they were walking, thousands of miles? And look, they don't look poor or unhappy or underfed like you would expect them to be. They look happy and joyful. And look, they even have new backpacks. What does this mean? This means that it was all staged by the Democrats so that the Democrats had a sort of basis to gain votes off." So they see this very basic and just manipulative evidence as true, and it's really hard to disprove them otherwise when people are really into this narrative. It comes back to we don't really know what's real or fake anymore. We live in a world where anything can be manipulated on the internet. So I think that's also probably why people are bringing it into the real world as well. I think they have this online community, but obviously that doesn't replicate the true feeling of community. So whenever they see these protests taking place, like the anti-lockdown ones, they see that as an opportunity to bring it from the internet into the real world. And then they kind of meet up and communicate or whatever. But yeah, I think the concern with the internet is that it does just spread rapidly, and you can just fake so much stuff of it online. You know, like you can send all these photos around, and if you just give a nice voiceover and explain something slowly, and you know, people will just believe that as true evidence. Yeah.
But there's hope, man. There's hope. I think that people are wary of the fact we're living through an era of misinformation and disinformation, and I've got faith that, you know, people like you, people who care a little bit and take time to debunk stuff, will restore a little bit of order, because I think I think most people, man, just want to live their lives in peace. They just want to get through the day. They don't subscribe too far left. They don't subscribe too far right. They're willing to listen to people and hear what they say. For sure, we've got some of those crazy ones either side. And their voices are loudest, so they often stand out more and attract more attention. But
but gaining. The thing is, they are gaining. Oh, sorry, this time my laptop actually on. They are not depleting in numbers, man. They're gaining it as time goes by. Oh, sorry, my laptop just turned off for a sec.
Good, you're still there.
Like, it seems the number of people getting radicalized in this direction is increasing. It's not really getting less. So that's why you're seeing normal people, like, who previously didn't really care about politics, suddenly start going down the rabbit hole, and then they start to get radicalized. But it's also not just, I guess it's not just about radicalization, but it's about how disinformation just affects everything that we live through. So I was going to give you an example of the George Floyd protests. There was this really sophisticated disinformation campaign. And it's, again, no one knows quite who it came from, but it seems like it's probably a state-sponsored disinformation campaign. So I don't know if you are active on Twitter. You said you were kind of staying away from it, but on the 1st of June, there was this hashtag trending saying DC blackout. And people were posting saying, oh my God, they just shut down the electricity in Washington, DC. You know, none of us can upload to the internet. People can't upload to the internet. They can't call. The last thing we know is that the police were putting silencers on their guns. That means that it's not just rubber bullets that they're shooting. And everyone was like panicking. And I think it was, go down the number here, this tweet was top trending across European countries. And it was, I think, 790,000 tweets in just a few hours about this supposed blackout. And people were really freaking out. They were like, oh my God, share this information. You know, it's going to get taken down by the internet, by Twitter, unless you keep sharing it. And then by the next morning, people were like, what the hell are you talking about? There was no blackout. I was uploading fine. And then it got even weirder, because there was another sort of disinformation campaign coming from these other, and by the way, a lot of these Twitter accounts tweeting about the blackout were bot accounts, or they look like bots. So a bot is obviously just like an artificial account set up by someone. It's like a throwaway just to spread around disinformation. Usually you can tell them, by the way, for anyone, if you see a suspicious looking account, the way to tell a bot is if you go on their page, like, they usually don't have a photo of themselves. They have a stock photo. They may not have a cover photo. They have very little information. Everything is private. And oftentimes the account has been created in the last few days as well. And also the English can sometimes be a bit funny. So then there were these other bot accounts which were copy and pasting this sentence saying, yeah, I was in Washington, DC last night and it was fine. I'm going to work. It looks like the DC blackout was misinformation. Like those exact words, so give or take. And they were copy and pasted to multiple accounts that were spreading it around as well. So what that creates is basically just real confusion as to what's true or not. And that also makes the fact checkers work a lot harder, because it's just like just so convoluted and messy, going through all these tweets. And also the original tweet saying the blackout was happening. A lot of them were saying, you know, don't trust the media. They are not telling us the truth as well. So they're again spreading this distrust in the media, which I think is really concerning too. So I think that one was really interesting because I got caught up in that. When I saw people were tweeting, "Oh my God, there's a blackout in DC," I really thought that there could have been, and it just makes people super emotional. When people are emotional, they just share, you know, without thinking really, or doing the research. So that was kind of quite an interesting one to see, because again, it makes you unaware of what's really going on, and where you get your information from. And again, it also enhances this distrust of the mainstream media, which everyone seems to hate at the moment, which again is also concerning, because we have like an all-right media in the UK. It's relatively free, not super free. I think we're 33rd, but we can kind of trust that what the BBC say is true, and they don't really spread fake news like other countries' media. But once you start to think that everything the BBC says is fake, you know, BBC get attacked from the far left and from the far right, saying they're biased on either side. Once you distrust that, then that's sort of like the basis of democracy, you know, sort of starts to get chipped away at. And eventually people turn to more extreme media outlets, you know, like InfoWars or something like that, or One American News, which are just, yeah.
What do you see as, you know, maybe finally to kind of conclude on a bit more of a lighthearted note, what solutions do you think there are going forward to try and counter some of this craziness?
I think trust for the most part the fact-checking websites. Like what's really good with Facebook is that you can follow loads of different news sources from around the world. So that's what I do. So I follow like Russia Today, but I also follow BBC. I follow, you know, like the New Arab, I think that's from Qatar or somewhere. But I also then follow like Jerusalem Daily. So you just get all these different viewpoints. And then you kind of see how different publications, because every publication, every media is biased to some degree. Like it's just the way it is. But just to be aware of those biases, get as much information as you can possible, just to see how different stories are covered in different outlets, and you kind of get a clearer idea. You can make up your own mind. And yeah, I think if you see a funny story, just think about if it's really possible. Do a fact check. Do a fact checking website. They're all right, and see if they've debunked anything. You know, there are also really good sources like Bellingcat do really good investigative journalism. Popular Front have also done some really good stuff as well. And you know, you can kind of trust those sources. If you do want to get stories that the mainstream media aren't telling you about, because obviously they still exist, don't go to sites which are really extreme like InfoWars. You know, look at Bellingcat. They do really good work. They actually have proper investigative journalists that back everything up with evidence. That's also another thing. If you see an outrageous claim and very vague evidence or no evidence at all, try and find that evidence. Go online, Google it, see if you can see any other stories covering it. But yeah, have a sort of like a kind of faith in the mainstream media. It's not too bad. Like, don't just take everything with a little bit of pinch of salt. I think that's the only way to do it right now. You know, like all the disinformation experts are really trying to figure out the answer to this question. It's not an easy one. And the disinformation campaign is going to get, you know, as time goes by, it's going to get more and more intense, especially leading up to the elections in the US. You're going to see a lot of crazy stories coming out. So just be aware of it, really. I think that's it. That's everything you can do right now.
Well said, man. I mean, I promise to try and avoid InfoWars as much as possible, despite how purely entertaining Alex Jones can be. He is fucking hilarious.
He's just an entertainer at the end of the day. Like he's super funny. I think he's going to give himself a stroke at some point, though, man. Like there's no way he can get that angry and that red and live past like 50. Like it's insane.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, because like, look how angry those people are. Like, do you really want to be that angry too? Like, if you live in these narratives where you think that the white race is going to get wiped out, or you think there's an evil liberal paedophile elite, like, of course you're going to be angry. Of course I would be out protesting and doing crazy stuff if I thought that was the truth. Like, do you want to kind of, I don't know,
or do the real research, man. Look, man, Jeffrey Epstein, man, fucking, you want to find out some paedophile elite shit, do the actual, start looking where the actual shit was happening, you know?
Exactly. And you know, there is a lot, you know, like, I think there is definitely a lot of paedophilia in what, you know, in the elite circles. I think that's 100% a true thing. And there's paedophilia everywhere. You know, people thought the Catholic Church paedophile scandal was a conspiracy theory for a long time, but we know that it does exist and it is more common than people think. But don't get so emotional that you let that cloud your vision and you think that anyone who is a millionaire or a billionaire is a paedophile, which seems to be what's happening. And don't let that lead you to satanic child abuse. Like, focus on the real issues. Focus on the real issues.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well,
yeah.
Dom, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much. I really appreciate your work, and your article's brilliant, and I appreciate your artwork as well, you know, and the illustrations you've done. Your Dom, for anyone who doesn't know, Dom's just an amazing, multi-talented person. He does a lot of cool stuff, and we'll definitely put your website in the description, man.
Yeah, I have to say, like, you've been doing excellent work throughout this time. You know, it is an emotional time for all of us, for everyone. It's like really tough, and I think what you've been doing is excellent, and it's really good to hear all the different opinions and the people you brought on here. You know, I think in some way you're helping fight disinformation by showing that you can have a conversation with people with different opinions, and you can learn about all this different stuff. And yeah, I think it's important, man. So big ups to you, man. Really, really impressive.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that a lot. Cool. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, bud. Yeah. Take it easy.
Man. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. In a bit.
Ciao.